Mr. Dawkins, or Dr. Dawkins actually, is probably a very clever man. But you know, there's one thing that I have found about men like that is that they also can be very blind on various issues. They're so studied in a certain way that they, in actual fact, are not open-minded on various issues. Now, I have looked at the theory of evolution, and you know, I can honestly say that a lot of the stuff is absolute fraud. Well, you don't have to believe me. You can talk about the coelacanths, for instance, that was supposed to be in the fish that crawled out the oceans and created life on land, which of course ultimately, because it had these little appendages looked like legs, and that's how it got out the water, and they found this skeleton, and this was the fish, and it was in the Natural History Museum for many years in the 30s, and many school children were told that this was the fish that did all this, and this is how land animals were created, etc. Well, of course, the big problem was that they found these fish, and which sort of shot the whole theory to pieces, because it was a theory, it was somebody's story, and this is the big problem. You can't check it out. But this particular indicator, you could check it out, because it was what they call a living fossil. The darn thing was in the oceans right now off South Africa, hundreds and thousands of them at the 300, 400 foot level. And they also found them in South America, in Asia, like Indonesia. So there's a lot found, and they're the one fish that cannot climb on land because they can't get within 200 foot of the surface, otherwise they tend to want to blow up, and maybe all the blood blows up or something like that. So they aren't the fish that did that, and so they embarrassingly just silently took it away out of the prominent position and put it in the cellars somewhere of the Natural History Museum. Maybe ended up in the rubbish bin, I don't know. But that was that theory blown to pieces. And I think it was Leakey who came up with the with Piltdown Man, and they constructed this thing and put it up on a pedestal, and once again thousands of school children and adults and people just listened to this fabulous story of how this was the missing link between man and ape. Well, of course, some guy who really knew Burns stood there and said, well, you know, you've got a big error here, because that is the skull of a man, but that is the jawbone of a chimpanzee, and that's the arm of a orangutan. In other words, they put this the man who constructed this thing put it together, and each of those bones came from even different date eras and time eras. The head might have been from 8,000 years ago, and the other bone was from, say, 3,000 years ago. So this was really a patchwork, not only of bones, but of time periods as well. So this is the one animal that couldn't be the missing link. So once again, this came off the pedestal and went downstairs. And they had another few goes, and then, you know, they had the final one with the tooth. Now they got from a skeleton down just a tooth, and this was the tooth of the man that disappeared, and this was the missing link and all this sort of thing. Except there's a man, damn it, who knew pigs in South America, and he said that's the pig, that's the tooth of a pig, and they gave the name and all this sort of thing. So that was also shown to be another fraud. So when you've got a belief like that, it is a belief that is based on so much fraud. For instance, they say that birds came from crocodiles and this sort of thing, or, you know, reptiles, which is not possible, because the whole structure, the bone structure, they say, well, we've got scales became feathers. Well, there's a different material, it's a different structure. The feather is an amazingly complex structure, which, when you study it, you'll understand. Just to accept it from a distance is probably all right, but when you get close to it, you realize that what they're talking about is absolute, unadulterated nonsense. And the cell scientists, the people who know the cells and what goes on, will tell you that, because they tell you that the cell structures are, well, let's take the DNA and the RNA. And the DNA is one structure, and the RNA is another one that apparently keeps the DNA in good order. So it's like a maintenance thing. And each of these can't live without each other. More than about 10 seconds outside of body, it's finished. So how did it take 1,000,000 years to form into a body? I don't know. Seeing it in today's mess, it can't do that. But here's a theory that works. It's called Hooke's theory. Stretching of a spiral spring is equivalent to the stretching force. And this is what we all got in our houses of some form or other, and how many businesses, and you push it down, you know, how many kilograms that is. Yeah, there we are. Or you can put more weight on, and it weighs it faithfully. And this is tested a million times, millions and millions of times a day, hundreds of millions of times a day, in businesses, in wholesalers, manufacturing, in homes across the country, and we rely on that scale of weights. There we are, on a little scale of weights. That's pounds, and that's kilograms on the other side on that scale. You've got to move the scale around to get the weight. Now, that's a well tested. They can't show us one evidence of crocodiles or reptiles becoming birds. It's just not there. It's not in the fossil record. And the fossil record still has the same spiders with the same spinnerets. They haven't changed. And they've got the same bats there that they have today. They haven't changed. Some may have gone bigger, some may have gone smaller. Some may have 4 hairs on its head, but others have 8. And they really tried with the fruit fly to try and change it, and what they did was they took it from 4 hairs to 5 hairs to 6 hairs to 7 hairs, and then, boy, they're really getting change here, and it reverted back to what it was. So it didn't work, because they used a fruit fly because it had a quick gestation period. So there's another one that hit the dust. However, the Bible says, there's rivers at the bottom of the sea. Now, we only found rivers at the bottom of the sea in 1980 when Jacques Cousteau went down to the bottom there and came back and said, as the Atlantic, he went down there to Apostasy of Trieste. He said, boy, there's rivers down there bigger than the Amazon. Makes it look like a trickle. Now, how did the Bible know that in the book of Job? How did the Bible know that there were springs at the bottom of the sea, which we only found 30 years ago, so that would make about 1970, that we found these things by accident at the bottom of the Pacific, all on the Pacific ridges, and we call them smokers. Heaven forbid we call it what the Bible calls as a spring. Absolutely heaven forbid, because then they'd have to take poison to do that. But anyway, they call it smokers, and these are huge vents, millions of them all over the bottom of the ocean, which are letting out superheated steel, and they found a new life form down there. There's so much, like the fact the Pleiades was gravitationally attracted. The Bible has that in. The whole of the water cycle, from rivers going down to the sea, and the sea evaporating, and then pulls it with clouds, and then dropping it on the land. We only worked that out probably about 100 years ago, 200 years ago. That was in the Bible for thousands of years ago. The whole hydrological cycle, as they call it, was all there. I just can't tell you. Just in one area alone of the Middle East now, they've found over 1,000 references in the last 3 or 4 years, tying up with the Bible. That's just one area, and that was in, I think, the ex-tribes area was Manasseh. Then they came and said, expert again, Kathleen Kenyon. Bible is wrong. The walls of Jericho fell down 400 years before the Bible said it was. Bible's wrong. That was back in the 50s and 60s. And I remember this very clearly. Then some guy goes out there and he says, you've dug in the wrong place. Here's the artifacts you're looking for, because that's how they did things. They knew that these artifacts were around at that time, and so if they weren't there when the wall fell, it meant the wall fell earlier, and if they were there when the wall fell, it meant it was around that area. And so once again, she was wrong. The expert was wrong. Then another expert got and said, the Bible is wrong. What is wrong? There's no such thing as the Hittite Empire. No evidence of that. Now, of course, we have a whole television series on the Hittite Empire, and it's capital. Then another person got up, another idiot. We call them experts. No such thing as the Israelite Empire. No evidence of big buildings, etc. Well, another little girl gets there. She gets the job, and she goes down there, and there she says, "There's David's palace, massive building, 200 yards long by. I forget how wide it is. Massive walls, etc." And then they also find what they call bullae, which are seals that sealed up various of the pamphlets or the scrolls, and these were there, and 56 of them, and 27 of them had the name of the biblical scholars in the Bible on them. So, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I'm just mentioning a few things. I mean, I'm not even covering 1/2 of 1 fraction of 1%. This is just there. So don't believe these experts who've got an axe to grind, who are being paid to put their view forward. Panin was paid for that. When he investigated it, and he was one of the most eminent mathematicians of his age, that's why he was asked to do it, he suddenly converted to the biblical belief. He said this is impossible, because he found the numerics of the Bible, and he said that every sentence and every line balanced to a rhythm of 7 and 13. If you've done a lot of writing like I have, you try and get just the right words down, never mind trying to do that. Thank you very much for listening.